Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us again this afternoon. I have the pleasure to welcome Yacine Benamane, a good friend of mine, who will bring his panel up on stage. So please join me in giving them a warm welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for staying with us and sticking with the team. And I appreciate that after a quite long day. And I take it for a testament of the quality of the panel we have today, and also the topic which we are going to discuss. We will go through the introduction of each member. And there is a reason why we kept this session and this topic at the end of the day. We discussed and we thought that it was, in fact, gathering and encompassing a lot of topic we addressed during the day by different groups. So I'm going to ask a very silly question, but who in the room is familiar with what we call the Red Sea crisis in this region? If you can only raise the hand. Yeah, it's going to be complicated for me to say something stupid. Okay, so a lot of people are knowledgeable. So why we decide to, and thanks for that, why we decide to address that? Because we felt that it has an implication for a lot of topics, including operation, including duty of care, including business continuity management. So let me start to introduce. So we have Hussein, Pradeep, and Ala. For those of you who are wondering, the photo of Ala is not IA created, it's his own photo. I don't know what's happened, but this is how it is.
It's me in the deep state of thinking.
Exactly, it is. What we are going to discuss now is, yes, Red Sea crisis. Nothing new, since October, I think, and in fact it was in relation with the conflict in the region, but important for the business. Then what? Okay, what's the implication for the security function and security professional? And this is where personally I found it an occasion to really portray and show the real added value of the security function for the business. And for me it was also a reflection what I heard this morning from a lot of colleagues, including Adel, from Shield. Security is not a job, it's really a profession. And this is, I think, the eternal question. So what I suggest is that we start at the genesis of this crisis to give a context. This session is going to be longer than the others because we want really to give credit to it and also to have a Q&A. It's not, no one is here to lecture. The security professional around the room, but we want also to get your feedback. So what I will start is Hussein, for those of you who don't know you. So what we want is to have an understanding of what is about the supply chain and the Red Sea, but also the implication.
No, thanks, Yacine. I'd like to think of it as the Yemen contribution to the Gaza conflict. That's the simplest way of actually putting it. And then I think it's very important, obviously when I say that, I've already covered the motive of the Houthis, who are the main threat actor here, causing this sort of situation. But also I think it's equally important to understand the evolution of that threat. So it was not a blanket threat to shipping in the beginning. We all know, given history of Yemen conflict, which is completely unrelated to what's happening in Gaza, that the Houthis did have the capability to create disruption in the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden. They've demonstrated that in the past in reaction to the war with Saudi Arabia, which took over the 8 years. What happened is, in the beginning, that's shortly after the October 7 attack and the Israeli response to that attack by sort of launching a war against Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis, as one of the capable actors in the axis of resistance, which is sort of Iran-led driven axis, they decided to basically contribute to the sort of resistance effort by actually attacking Israeli shipping interests. So what most companies and charter companies, shipping companies were dealing with in the beginning was actually they had to figure out their Israel nexus. So what vessels are they chartering that has some form of an Israeli link? And then you can be creative with that. It could be an Israeli company, it could be a company partly owned by an Israeli partner, some Israeli shareholder. So you can go layers and layers in that. And they did quite an impressive job in doing some research to find these links. But soon after, this has evolved into becoming a threat against any company that is doing any business with Israel. So the company itself does not have to have a direct Israeli nexus, but if they have any interest in Israel or they're doing lifting from Israeli ports or doing any sort of business with Israel, then they became a threat as well. And then you added a sort of a more complex range of parties to that threat. And then after the decision by the US and partners to sort of assemble a naval coalition to respond to that threat, then all interests associated or affiliated to the countries that took part in that coalition became a legitimate target as well for the Houthis. I'll just throw a few observations since the beginning of the US-led naval sort of coalition operation against the Houthis in Yemen. In the beginning of that, we actually saw an increase in Houthi attacks as a result of that. So maybe towards the end of January, I would say the attacks increased by 40%. Towards the end of February, they increased by 100%. And then we started seeing the attacks sort of decrease, but with flare-ups. So what that tells us, even if you look at the data up until end of April, there was a recent flare-up in it, but it's not comparable to the levels in January and February. What that tells us is two things. One is that there is an element of degradation of capabilities that had actually took place as a result of the US and ally strikes in Yemen, but also there's lack of targets. Because as you all know, the overwhelming majority of shipping companies have decided to go to the Cape. And therefore, the traffic in the Bab el-Mandeb area is not the same compared to earlier levels, January, Feb, and even before that. So I think the answer is a combination of both things. But nevertheless, even if you speak to the US Navy, they will not, it's not a secret, they will tell you that, yeah, they've degraded their capabilities, but that does not mean that they've been successful at preventing or stopping them from conducting attacks. So this is quite important because it tells us something about also the current environment. Because a lot of people just stopped at, okay, everything is being rerouted to the Cape, but what happens next? When can shipping or travel sort of resume through Bab el-Mandeb? So that's sort of my initial take on it. I'll just pass it on back to Yacine and other members of the panel to talk about maybe the operational impact.
Hussein, thanks for that. Kudos to be able to to summarize such complex conflict in a short time. But again, my question is, no one is here from authorities or government. So then what? Yeah, it's a geopolitical conflict. It's a tit for tat. We understand, but I want to understand, and quite frankly, I'm very curious about the implication for me as a consumer or customer, but also for a private operator and public operator. So I will give it to you. So can you give us what do you think about the impact, if any?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Hussein highlighted some really important points. Obviously, when you zoom out and you look at the financial implication, this trickles down to the consumer throughout the supply chain, all the way down to the consumer. So, the cost of shipping, having to reroute our shipping lanes through the Cape of Hope in South Africa and beyond, obviously increases our costs, increases the cost of insurance, increases, the goods, the raw materials that we have to purchase and ship across to our manufacturing sites globally. So, we're present in about 180 countries globally with manufacturing at 80 different facilities across the globe. So that obviously causes significant disruptions in our supply chains. So we've had to look at, different measures. Do we add buffers to our supply chains? Where do we go into our crisis management plans and activate some of those plans where our manufacturing capabilities can be increased in one area where it's not impacted by the Suez Canal or the Bab el-Mandeb. So these are some things that we definitely have looked at. And from a planning perspective, I think, having experienced these types of crises before, not similar, but in terms of, piracy and other threats that we've experienced in the area, we've been able to divert and activate our previous crisis management plans so that, we're bypassing that area. Nevertheless, it still impacts our finished goods and the cost of procuring and producing the medications. For example, one of our brands is Sensodyne, Advil, Panadol, these types of brands that we own. Ultimately the cost is passed down to the consumer because, where else would these costs go to? So it really does impact most people globally, whether they know it or not, because the finished goods on the shelf, the security costs actually add to the finished goods on the shelf. I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, before going to Pradeep, so it's good. So we heard about the impact on the cost. This is about trying to find alternative to the maritime through the sea freight, which despite the capacity which there is limited. We also discussed about the insurance of the carrier.
Yep.
We also discussed about the increase of fuel, I think, for everybody, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Interesting. So this has a real and factual impact on the operation of companies operating in the region.
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing that gets impacted is the oil prices, and after that, all the commodity prices follow through with the increasing costs. So then the commodities impact our raw material sourcing, right? And then everything else just trickles down from there and goes up and up and up.
Clear. I think also for the audience, the big elephant in the room is the civil aviation. Yeah, so having missile going in a region which is already quite described as a VUCA one is not ideal for tourism, and it's not ideal also for work stream of foreign currency, if you think about the Suez Canal for Egypt. So the implications are there, although they remain geopolitical and they remain state level for certain of them. So, good. We understand the landscape. We understand the impact. What is the role of security here? Do we really have a role to mitigate that? Pradeep, what do you think?
It's a tough question because, we all talk about a lot of technology, AI and everything. But the fact is that the pirates or the hackers are probably equally equipped or equally knowledgeable about how to break this technology and get into this. Today, we are in a situation where even a fishing boat can come near the vessels, take pictures, send back to the cams, and then let the people know how to attack or how to work on these things. Now, having said that, one of the things from the authorities' perspective or from the government perspective is probably to work with the neighboring naval forces, the navies from the strong navy forces from neighboring countries, and probably deploy their forces into the ocean, and then protect these vessels who are passing by, who are still operating in the region. From a security point, the vessels can be more equipped with long-distance detection of movements in the sea. There should be probably more drones in the vessels where they can also fight back. You still have limitations because underwater drones doesn't work that much, so that's a limitation on that. In the midterm, people are already looking at cybersecurity. That's an important factor in that because you have a lot of data that's in the vessels, the data about the cargo, data about the crew, the people, the personnel, so which need to be protected where, if an attack happens, that data is not taken away by anyone from there. So cybersecurity is really important in the vessels these days. Then in midterm, probably when you make the new vessels, there is already plans to have more stronger, thicker material, deeper vessels for that matter. In the long term, there's also, they are looking at having the automated vessels, where you can probably nullify or minimize the crew on board so that you minimize the losses on those ones.
Very good. So I think it's a very relevant one. So it's not about physical threat only, but it's also about it's going on a cyber dimension of what we see. Good one on this. So the question again I have, and please, if the audience has any, please throw it, is today we understand the impact and the mitigation from your side, okay?
Right.
You just described mitigation from a pure security point of view, cyber or physical, which I think most of us are quite familiar with. So is there any other reflection in terms of business security option? What I'm thinking here, and I don't think this crisis is quite new. COVID brought its own complexity and pushed the business to review the supply chain, okay? Pre-COVID, we had a supply chain which was relying on a very short stock and easy supply. COVID learned that with the closure of the border, you had to bring everything onshore rather than offshore. So my thinking here, is there any other things you have in mind regarding some business security mitigation?
100%, because and that's an extra work that's come to the business people on ground. So one of the things that we are doing, I'm sure everyone is doing today, is to be more diligent on your forecasting as to what is your requirement for the next 6 months to 1 year's time, and probably to have the inventory in country, in region, so that you don't have to be waiting for the long lead times like Ala was saying. So that's one thing we are all working on. The second is to diversify your supply chain. You know, you don't have to probably depend on one source for your components. You have to find more sources for your components so that you don't wait for one person, one supplier to come and give you the components to work on that. Maybe a long-term thing is, again, to have more regional manufacturing, you know, because today, most of us who depend on, one place for our manufacturing and shipping from there. So long-term, it could be, a non-centralized, decentralized manufacturing where you can have multiple sources of your company and shipping into a region so that you don't have to have long shipping terms or long shipping routes to be taken for that.
Very good. Very good. So it's for me, it's really echoing what we are doing also in the company. So, and all these measures which has just been described fall somewhere between security and other functions. Supply chain is one of them. And what we did from our side also, from the company perspective, is that when the company and the supply chain start changing the route, came the first aspect, the first layer was to really review the routes we had. Yeah, so we used, as you rightly said, a multimodal transportation modes, meaning that instead of going through the sea, no, we start going through the train, through the air, and through the land. These need due diligence from security and procurement. So this is where the security stepped in at the first time. The second aspect also, which is echoing what you just said, is about the clear mapping of your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 supplier. And surprisingly, the common sense will dictate that if you do supply chain, you have a clear visibility and mapping of your tier 1, tier 2 supplier. Common sense is not very common. So you find out that sometimes there is no really visibility. Yeah, we know that we work with 1, 2, 3, but do we have a clear mapping? And most importantly, do we have a clear, I would say, SWOT analysis about the strength, the weakness, the opportunity, and the threat for each of them? So again, a very interesting point. But Hussein, I want to ask you now, roughly in terms of attacks, are we magnifying this crisis? Is it 10 attack, 20 attack, 60 attacks, or is it really hurting the economy? And the second thing is, what do you think on the midterm? I'm not saying the long term because I think it's quite complete, but please.
No, it's more than 90 attacks. Now, obviously, with the fact that most companies have started rerouting to the Cape, then you have less targets for the Houthis. And then you could see the targeting patterns have slightly shifted towards trying to target the military assets that are sort of responsible for conducting strikes against the Houthis. But if you look at, I would say that the highest level was around mid-February. So if you just look at pure data analysis, you would see mid-February was the peak of attacks. And then from there on, it sort of flared up and went down. Interestingly, something that I wanted to mention is that we did see a correlation between attacks decreasing and the US cyber attack against the Bahshad, which is an Iranian vessel in the Red Sea that's been sort of patrolling the Red Sea and likely giving information to the Houthis passing, because a lot of the vessels were turning their information systems, location systems off to be able to get up, but the Iranians were just patrolling the Red Sea and they were sort of passing on a lot of that information to help with sort of identifying the targets. And the Americans attacked this vessel through a cyber attack, and they've taken it to maintenance ever since. So that could also explain some of the decrease in attacks after February. But I would also probably, I think it's not often discussed, the sort of the geopolitical or maybe macroeconomic impact of this outside the direct shipping angle. So you look at a country like Egypt, for example. So you have the Suez Canal, and then you could see the revenues from Suez Canal as one of the biggest contributors to Egypt's budget. And these have been, at least they've gone down by 50%, at least. You know, maybe the real numbers are even bigger than that. And you probably saw how a number of international organizations, countries, have rallied to save Egypt in the last couple of months. You heard a lot of news about Egypt suddenly getting all this influx of cash from the IMF, but also from other partners and allies, and partly to mitigate the impact that they had on their Suez Canal revenues. To answer your question on what's next, I think it's a combination of good and bad news. So I'll start with the sort of the bad news is the Houthis are not going to stop conducting attacks up until the resolution of the Gaza conflict. So don't think there is anything that is really going to work. Whatever the Americans are doing and their allies there, yeah, it's helped in a way to degrade their capabilities. It's not enough. It's not enough specifically for companies to accept and tolerate that risk, because they were not going to go into a conflict zone and pray for the best. No one is actually going to do that. Most people will say, we'll take the extra cost and go to the Cape. And interestingly now, you could see also the Houthis trying to extend their targeting to the Gulf of Aden to potentially catch some of the traffic that is going down to the Cape as well. So they have the Shahed 136 Iranian drones that can have 2,000 kilometer range. So they do indeed have the capability. They just need to use it wisely and economically. So that is also very important. The good news is this is not, because I've heard some saying this, so I want to sort of disagree with it. This is not something that, because I've heard some forecasts around that the Houthis will continue to do this regardless. That's not true. So actually, this is related to Gaza. They've been very outspoken about it. In the past, they've put their money where their mouth is. Every time they said they're going to do something, they've at least attempted to do it. Whether they're successful or not, that's something else. And when they say we're going to stop it if this stops, and it means they will stop it. Now, the independent dynamic to that is whether someone believes that more action should be taken against the Houthis in order to prevent them to pose a similar threat in the future. Then it becomes a dynamic of its own that is not related to the Gaza dynamic. But short of that, if things are bound to a sort of a Gaza ceasefire, either now, after 1 month, or we don't know when this is going to happen, then the Houthis will unilaterally stop conducting these attacks, and they will likely make an announcement, go public with it.
Interesting. So you see, so there is a correlation, and I just hear you, between this and the Hamas conflict. And this is where I want to, we discuss about the impact. And there is something which we witnessed in different companies. And I want also to check the audience. What we witnessed also is that certain product and certain company, Western company, most of them, has been targeted and the product boycotted. Okay, so there is a big boycott on certain product. Do you have, only for hat, do you think that it's true or not, or it's relevant or not in terms of boycotts of product? Good. Okay, so we have a minority who think that. Interesting. And this is where it's getting definitely impacting the business in terms of what we need to do. So tit for tat attacks related to the Hamas and the polarization. And this is, again, this is giving me a very good gateway to the presentation of Marsh before this, which are in fact mapping out the polarization we see in different countries in 2024 and the months to come. So interesting. So we went through this. The security has a busy time, I think, for security. It's in fact covering what we discussed in terms of incident management. It's also covering what we discussed about intelligence gathering this morning regarding the veracity and the accuracy of your sources, especially on this age and the time of deepfake and misinformation and disinformation. It's also addressing the duty of care, and I think also we touch on it on the civil aviation. We still have quite vivid the down of the plane coming from Iran, if you remember about some years ago during the heat of the conflict, where a Ukrainian flight has been gunned down inadvertently. So this is where we see the role of the security getting really beyond the lock and glock. And I think it's important to reflect on this, is that the security function today is not about only the old style of security. And my colleagues before me already mentioned that it's a profession which is evolving and which is, the spectrum is getting wider and wider. Yeah, we tend to complain about this, quite frankly, because it's bringing a lot of things on our plates. But at the same time, it's, I think, an opportunity for the security professional to shine and relieve. So, no, very good. So what I want is before, because we had the luxury to have extra time, so we negotiate with Ian and the team. So I want also to hear from the audience. What do you think about this supply chain risk? Of course, we touch only the surface of what can be a supply chain risk today. But I want also to have some questions. So please, if you have any question, there is a mic somewhere. Yeah, is it working?
Yes, it's working now.
Very
Thank
good.
you. I think Hussein summed up some very complicated issues very delicately and in a very unbiased manner, and I quite enjoyed hearing his views on it. Do you see, talking about boycotts, and I'm not proposing them or advocating for them, but do you see them coming into the security industry where maybe technology providers who, are maybe manufacturing CCTVs or facial recognition softwares, video analytics, do you see them being boycotted in the future if this turmoil continues in the region? Curious to hear your thoughts on it.
I can answer from an operational perspective a little bit differently, not directly to that, but I know when one of our brands was mentioned during the boycott and campaigns, we had to definitely increase our operational security at our manufacturing facilities, particularly in 2 Asian countries, because the boycott campaign was really picking up steam in these countries. So in terms of physical security, we had to add on additional layers of security. We had to find some workarounds, continue operations at nighttime more than daytime, these types of things. But in terms of facial recognition and the impact of that, I'm not sure.
No, I don't really have anything to sort of share specifically on that particular part of the industry. I would just say we are conscious of reputational risk stemming from that crisis. So this is something that I think most of you should be looking at, ideally sort of jointly with between corporate security and government corporate relations, because despite the fact that it's unlikely that Western governments are going to take, for example, measures or sort of sanctions that are going to be applicable in this particular context, the same way they were applicable with the Ukraine crisis, you do have a lot of grassroots activism that is taking place. And if you are on the consumer end, you are likely to get some impact from that. Now, the way you measure that impact, it depends on what exactly that you're doing, and how much of your consumer sort of retail business, impacts your just overall business. So I think that these are conversations that we are certainly having at Shell. So I believe many others would be having those conversations as well.
If I can add on this, there's on the boycott, it's quite a sensitive topic because it's definitely hitting the bottom line and the P&L of a lot of company. But there is an aspect which is also very important, is that people affiliated with this brand, yeah, including me, you, and other people. So there is also importance to be careful about your physical security, and here we come back to the baseline and the basics of protecting the site. And Hussein put it quite well in terms of multi-layers of protection, but also increasing the personal awareness of our employees and travelers. Okay, so there is a need to remind everybody that duty of care has been addressed this morning and discussed, but also it's also important that the personal security remain also the responsibility of people themselves. Okay, so this is where I would say it's getting quite wide. Thanks for the question. Any other question? Question or inputs, please. We want to learn with you also.
Thank you. I think you're going to lose some pound today just between the two corners of this hall. Thank you. I think the title of the discussion is extremely spot on. It's the missing link, and often we talk a lot about cybersecurity, to some degree AI, knowing that supply chain security is extremely important, if not just as important as cybersecurity. I just have one very simple question. Why are we making too much noises about cybersecurity, more noises than the supply chain? If you could just shed some light on that.
I know. You are very modest. It's far from being a very simple question. So it's a quite complex one, but we'll try at my best with the team to get it. I think it will be wrong to segment between supply chain and or logistic and IA or the IT sphere. We are living in an era of digitalization, and we are also living in an era of performance where what we call the non-value added activity is replaced by automation, by robotics, and IA is one cog in the middle of all this machine. So there is a tendency to of course magnify IA, okay, and I'm far from being an expert on this, but what I know for sure is that the way we are operating today in our factories is quite different than the way we were operating 4 years ago, okay? So I'm not talking about a decade ago. So and the reason behind this is that your systems now are linked to internet, which was not the case before. Your maintenance system is also linked to internet. Your supplier who is coming for maintenance of different components is also doing that remotely. And COVID only accelerate this tendency, okay, where in fact employees were not able to come to the factory, and industry start to be innovative to the way it is. So I think it need to remain a concern, because this is a threat which I think has been recognized by a lot of industries, especially the insurance industry. And it need also not only to recognize, and you're right, it's a lot of buzz. Problem is that most of the time we talk a lot about something, but we only talk. Okay, so there is a need, and I think it's been also highlighted by my colleagues this morning, is, okay, we assess, we identify the threat, but what do we do about it? And this is, I believe, the hardest part of it, because it's really, it depends on the budget, it depends on competencies, which, as you probably heard this morning, is scarce. There is, I think, a million job, I heard someone saying a million job gap in terms of IT specialist or cyber specialist. So it's quite a big beast to tackle, but yeah, I agree. It's a big concern as we speak.
If I may add to that, like Yacine said, supply chain and security are two entirely different functions, and probably, I mean, I'm not an expert to talk more about supply chain, but from a security point, cyber security is again why more important. Today, you can even hack the directions of the vessels. You can control the vessels remotely by hacking those ships and information in there. And I was talking about the information on the cargo, the people, everything that can be protected with that. One of the other things is we didn't talk about the port security. You know, there are a lot of people who are entering into the vessel or working into the cargoes and everything when the ship is at the port, and things like AI, FR, everything is really important as to who is accessing, who is coming into that, what is being done. So that definitely can be tracked with the help of AI and cybersecurity and functionalities there, technologies there.
Yeah. If I can also add to that, actually, I think, physical security has kind of, I dare say, reached a state where we more or less know what the risks are that we face. Where with the new age of technology and how fast businesses are adopting technology into day-to-day operations, including manufacturing, we really do not know exactly what the risks are that these manufacturing sites, for example, face. But from a physical security perspective, I compare the two. Physical security, takes one person with a car driving, ramming it through a manufacturing site to gain access. Most likely they'll be unsuccessful depending on which country they're attacking. The impact on the business and the operations is minimal, right? We might have to replace some gates, we might have to upgrade security and things like that. But with a manufacturing, for example, a hacker in their mom's basement, for example, a hacktivist, if we will, can cause quite a bit of disruption that will take months and months until all the systems come back online. And then the other thing I think the cybersecurity community is doing better than the physical or corporate security industry is that they have a lot more marketing and a lot more drive behind their initiatives versus security. I think in the security industry we've kind of we've more or less settled into the industry. The businesses kind of understand what corporate security does, but the cybersecurity is a new, sexy thing on the block that everybody's talking about, and I think that has something to do with it as well.
Very true. Thanks for that. Any other question? Very good. So no, thanks for that. So I hope the topic brought some interest for you. My closure note on this, and thanks again for the remaining 3-4 minutes, is that what we are doing in the company is in fact extending to the role of the corporate security in terms of risk management and business continuity planning. And the first step we are going through and discussing with a lot of colleagues, we have almost similar one, is to review the risk register of the company, where in fact you have all the risks which are relevant and pertinent to the business. And you'll be surprised how vague this exercise can be if you don't have the right tools. Yeah. So yeah, it's a high risk, it's a mid risk, a lot of impact, low impact. So the discussion gets heated because we want to know, okay, what do you mean by impact, higher or low? And the impact most of the time is related to the value, the dollar value of the assessment you have on how this situation is going to impact you. And the Red Sea there's no playbook. The reality is as simple as that. There's no playbook to refer to. Businesses are trying to bring the smartest people in the industry to sit and review the standard approach we used to have. And the second thing is that it became, unfortunately, a perma-crisis. So we are going through crisis to crisis. It started in October, Hamas, Israel, and after that you have Iran and Israel tit for tat, and we discussed, and after that you had the flood, and after that you had earthquake in certain countries. So it's really heavy. So something which I want to really leave the audience with is what we all discussed today is very, I believe it's relevant and should help to do that. What is most important is the well-being of the people behind the desk, the well-being of the women and men who are handling this crisis. Hence the need to be very cautious about the mental health of the people who are doing that and checking your teams about that. Yeah, so it's something we forget sometimes, but I think it's important. And the last word is that we have also next week an OSAC meeting regarding almost the same topic. And I don't know where's the OSAC lead here, but we had also, yeah. So, and we have also, and for those of you who are interested, please reach out, and we will also discuss this matter in full detail. So, if there is no other question, thank you very much for your attendance and staying with us until the end. Thank you very much for that.